All right. So for starters here, I've just cloned the Mad Libs exercise here. This is just the starter code master branch. So let's just look at what it does in my browser. Just ran npm start, and it does almost nothing. It just says Mad Libs at the top. So we're going to need to add some inputs where you can type in the words for the Mad Lib. We're going to need to create a dropdown where they can choose which Mad Lib they're going to use, because there's a few different stories that they can choose between. And then we're going to have some logic for determining when the Mad Lib is finished, and then putting those words into the story and displaying them to the user. So as before, I've created a solution for this exercise on a different branch in Git. So look at my branches. We're on the master branch currently. There's also a solution branch that is the solved version. Because there's so much starter code to begin with, I think it's easy to look at a diff between the starter code and the solution, just for me to remember like what actually did I do, because most of the code I left as is, just a few things had to be added. So just a few changes that had to be made. Some functionality to know when the story is finished, handling change events, creating options. So I guess a few different files had to change. Andrew, question?
Yeah, I have a question more about diff and like what it's showing. Is there a command in Git to automatically switch over all your stuff to like the diffed one?
I mean, the diffed one is a different branch. I could just switch to that branch. Like I was comparing the difference between solution and master. So, I mean, if I want the solution version of the app, I can just switch to that branch.
When you switch to the branch, you have to like git clone again to get the files?
No, all of the different branches are in my local repository. Yeah, when you clone a repository from GitHub, you get all the branches that it has. So by default, the master branch is checked out, but you can switch to other branches. We're going to talk about this more next week, I believe, maybe the week after that. Yeah. Are you asking like how I could just apply the difference?
Yeah, I think you answered my question, because I think I was just like a little unfamiliar with like, I'm still like a little unfamiliar with like branching and how it works.
Okay.
But that makes sense that it takes the entire thing and you can just switch everything over.
Yeah. I think you'll be getting more answers to that question also when we formally talk about Git in the near future. So it's a good question. Keep it in mind. All right. So first of all, first problem that I see with the starter code is that it just hard codes madlib 0. And the user should have some way to change which madlib they're using. Although, actually, first we'll make the inputs to let a user fill out this first default madlib. And after that works, we'll add the functionality to change the madlib, because we won't know if we've successfully changed the madlib unless we're actually able to do something with it. All right, so in my template, see here. Where are the actual inputs at? Okay, so that's in the word form component. That's right. So the app.js just renders the word form. Okay, so right now this word form is just empty. It's not displaying anything at all. So instead of just an empty div, we're going to have a list for all of the inputs. I'm going to possibly style that later, so I'm going to add a class to it. And then we're just going to have a list of inputs. But now how do we know what those inputs are? We're going to have to figure that out real quick. Now, the words should be getting passed into the word form. Let me just double check that. Go to the app.js. So yeah, this is already part of the starter code. The selected Mad Libs words are already being passed in here. Let me just look at the data real quick. Mad Libs, madlib.js. So yeah, these are each of our individual words for a Mad Lib. It's this array of objects. They each have a key, which is kind of like for our code to refer to it, and then the label, which is going to be the human readable version of these words. So we've got this list of words being passed in props. We need to transform these words into some list items that we can put into this list here. So remember, React is going to yell at us if we don't have a unique key for every item in a list. And the instructions asked us to put a placeholder in the inputs. So we're going to use the label for the word because that's the human readable version of it. So that should generate a bunch of inputs. Let's see what that looks like on our screen. Okay, perfect. So now we've got all of our inputs from the Mad Lib. I misspelled class name, so I'll fix that in just a second. Cool. So I've got all these inputs. I don't really like this default list rendering here with the little bullets on the left. It looks kind of wacky because just the inputs are centered, but then these bullets are on the left. So I'm going to fix that up real quick. Class name is inputs. We're already importing the CSS file. That's just from the starter code. So I'll just add some CSS here. Style type none. Cool. So that gets rid of the little bullets there. Fixed our error also. So that's great. Okay, so I've got the inputs in my Word form. Now from my app.js, see, we've got this on Word input change function. So I think that's working correctly, just from the starter code already. Just read over that real quick to confirm. But we need to know, well, actually, first, let's just display the story in progress, and then we can worry about making it look nice afterwards. Wait. Jeff. Get text. I'm missing here. Oh, and the story component itself is not rendering anything. Okay, so it's probably getting the right data. We just need to actually show it. So we are sometimes working on these like halfway finished projects, just remembering what's been done and what hasn't been done already. Okay, so here we go. We're displaying the story, but it's showing undefined for everything that we have not yet defined. Person. Okay, so looks like this is working so far. I'm able to type some words into the form. They get plugged into the Mad Lib. So we're able to create a story here. That's cool. So this is most of the main functionality, but making it a little bit nicer, I would like to only display the story when it's complete. So we're going to go back to the app.js. Instead of just always displaying our story, we're going to conditionally display our story. So only if the story is finished will we actually display it. So we're going to use that ampersand to conditionally render this on the right side only when this left side is true. But we've not yet defined the story is finished function. So we're going to have to do that really quick in order to make this work. So this is a pretty simple loop. It might remind you of some of our week 1 or 2 challenges. Basically going to look at every word and just if they're all finished, return true. But otherwise, we're going to return early, return false. So that looks pretty simple. Okay, so now I refresh the page. We are no longer seeing the story at all. Cool. So as soon as I type into the last input, then the story shows up because it's conditionally rendering only when all of the inputs are filled in. So that's cool. Then one last thing that I need to do is let the user switch the madlib. So right now it's just hard coded to only use madlib 0. But remember, there's a whole bunch of these. Well, I guess there's 3 of them. But still, the user should be able to do more than just the one madlib. So I'm going to have to create the different, let's see, first I'm going to create a select dropdown for where I want to put these madlibs. So we got our select dropdown, and then inside it's going to be full of options, option elements. I guess at this point I can just copy it. You kind of know where this is going. So we're mapping over that madlibs list of all of the stories possible, and then creating an option for each one of them. Using the index in the array so we can refer back to it, and then putting the title in the text of the option so the user knows which one they're clicking on. And then lastly, we have to handle that change. By using our state setter. We got this from the use state up above. Selected madlib, set selected madlib is use state. So if we want to change the selected madlib to something else, we use that setter madlibs with the event.target.value, whatever option was clicked on. And so now this should be complete. So here's the atrocious art show needs, noun, first name, last name. If we go for bad dog, this one needs some different words, describing word, noun 1, plural noun. And then breaking news uses your state, nonsense word, different inputs. And different number of inputs too. You can see the list of inputs is a little bit shorter for breaking news than the others. So yeah, that's madlibs in a nutshell. Do people have any questions about this? Is this kind of roughly what you were expecting, or is this like a totally different solution than what you came up with? Andrew?
Just a little different because I think the instructions were that we weren't supposed to modify app.js.
Did it say that?
It did, yeah.
Oh, well, here we are.
So yeah, there's some modifications made. So I think like we added a selector component. I think Raphael just has his select element on app.js. So there were a few changes, but essentially it's the same solution. So yeah, we did say kind of keep app.js for the new version kind of unchanged, but I don't think it's too different than what we had before.
Although, well, I don't understand why in the update madlib words function is the set selected madlib called at the end. This is in our new version, though. I wish you had done the same version that we had.
Yeah, I might have
It's really hard to compare the two.
been looking at a slightly older version of it. Let's see. So here's what's on GitHub right now. You're saying in the app.js?
Yeah, so in the function update madlib word,
Mm-hmm.
Why is set selected madlib there at the end? When all it's supposed to be doing is updating the madlib word.
Well,
So-
because your view doesn't know about it until you put it in the state. So if you want like other dropdowns and stuff to update based on, wait, oh, this is just the word, not the madlib itself.
If I could answer that.
Please.
So yeah, we have a state value. We need to call the state updating function to notify React that we want to update something. So all the craziness that's going on in update madlib word, basically we have an object that has a bunch of data in it. That object has, I believe, like a words array inside of it, has a title. It might have a couple other things. We actually need to update the array within that object, but we can't do it directly. Again, this is still a state value that we're messing with. So we need to basically create a new copy, which is being done on line 18. And then line 20 through 23, that's just basically adding a new item into the word array. So again, dot words is an array. We're accessing some index in it and adding a new property called user word. I believe in the previous iteration, it was just called value. But user word is what the user actually entered. So we're storing that in our object, but then we need to tell React, hey, this is our new object. We can't just modify it directly, and React can say, all right, cool, we have some new data. So we still are treating this as a state object, where we need to make a copy, modify the copy, and then pass back the copy so that the state variable is using the latest data that we want.
Cool, thank you. Wow.
Do you mind go over the story is finished function one more time, please?
Yep. Let's just look at these words real quick. What? I'm
We
not.
did print instead of console log.
That is. Oh my gosh! What is
I do
this
that all the
girl?
time.
But that's like actually a function in JavaScript. Apparently, it like.
Yeah, it makes you print the website, which I discovered a while ago. It was annoying.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so all of our word objects by default, they just have a key and a label. But when we type in here, we're adding another property to the same object. So now in addition to the key and the label, it has a value of whatever I typed into the input. So we could like keep this data totally separate and just have like an array keeping track of what we've typed into these inputs that is separate from the word objects. But it kind of makes sense to keep them together. And I think it makes a lot of the rest of the application easier to write. So yeah, whenever I type into one of these text boxes, I'm adding a value onto the original word object. So we're just looping through all of our words and seeing which ones have values. The ones I have not typed in anything yet, they'll have undefined for value. But the ones I have filled in, they'll have a defined value for value. So just if word.value should tell us if there's something or nothing. Sound good?
Yep, thank you. Thank you.
I saw another hand just a second ago.
Yeah. So if I always get confused by this, and I'm always like, why is it like const story is finished instead of like function story is finished, like defining a function?
Mhm.
I just don't, I can't like wrap my head around like the reasons and differences, like why.
So I mean, you do get that there are different ways to define functions. You're just wondering like, why have I done const story finished over function story is
Yes.
finished?
Yes.
Um, honestly, in this case, it probably doesn't matter too much. I want to say it's mostly just a stylistic difference at this point. It's just kind of like in modern JavaScript, we tend to like use const as the default for assigning variables. We commonly use arrow functions if we don't care about the value of this. We'll commonly use an arrow function because they're like sort of simpler, I guess, than just using the function keyword. Because this will like create a new value for this, which maybe we don't care about that. We don't want to worry about that. So yeah, I feel like this is just kind of the more modern style. Like in theory, this prevents certain bugs from happening because if we have const stories finished, then it's impossible for me to reassign it later to something else. Whereas just using function stories finished, there's nothing preventing that reassignment. But like practically, this is not a problem that I've struggled with in the past. So like the practical benefits of like this style are maybe minor, but this is just kind of a more conventional modern style, I guess. This is just how people write it these days. Yeah, sorry, I don't have like a super strong answer there for you. I don't know, Ankur, do you have other thoughts about const and the arrow function versus just function keyword?
No, they're pretty interchangeable. I usually just do fat arrow functions for React just because, for class-based components, you want to have fat arrow functions to avoid conflicts with this. So yeah, I think just pick one and kind of be consistent with it usually is what my advice would be. So either if you're fine with functions, go with functions, but I think fat arrow functions, I'm just used to writing those. So that's what I prefer at this point.
Yep. Thanks. Kat, do you have a question?
Yeah, do you mind just scrolling down? I just want to see how you like conditionally rendered the story. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying that method. It's not working, but I'll just keep working on it. I think it looks a little different than yours. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I'll apologize for that. So again, there were some changes made for MATLAB challenge this time around. So I think the current version has underscores for as like blank words, and that's going to affect like if the user has not input anything, the get text function returns like a series of underscores. So you need to check that a little differently. You might want to check if the user word exists in the object, or to make sure there's not like a bunch of underscores, which is kind of hacky, I would say. But yeah, sorry. So again, the story is finished. This hiding the component was something I didn't consider. So that might be a little more tricky with the new version.
Cool. Yeah, sorry for the confusion there. Any other questions about Mad Libs or my solution or just React in general?
I had a comment or question. Ankur posted something really sort of interesting in like the Quebec channel about like passing through custom data attributes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I just felt like, is it like a best practice? It just seems like incredibly useful to like pass through things like within an event like that.
Hold on.
I am by no means an HTML expert, but I would say it's neat to know. I don't know how often one should use like custom attributes, but it is useful in certain cases. But I don't have enough experience to know if that is like appropriate to kind of just rely on that. HTML isn't really built to kind of it's not a programming language, right? So you're not meant to store new values and kind of do it that way. But it is kind of cool that you can do it if you need to.
So I knew about this data donuts kind of convention, like back in the jQuery days before people used front-end frameworks at all. Like this was how you stored data. It was just in custom HTML attributes called data, whatever you wanted to store. but that was always like kind of messy getting the data out and just keeping everything organized. So people were pretty glad to use front end frameworks. I didn't know about this data sets property, event.target data sets, that lets you like access all the data properties like a dictionary. That does seem useful, although I guess that like solution just wouldn't occur to me, or doesn't seem like a solution I would search for, because I would probably just pass data around using props and then have a component look at its own props instead of passing all the information in the event. But this is definitely like a cool technique. And now that I know about it, I might be considering it as I encounter new problems in the future. So that's interesting. Learn new stuff all the time. Let's see, yeah, any other questions? I think we're about due for a break here. And we're gonna start building up our news site a little bit more. Any more last minute questions? Could have sworn I saw 2 hands up the last time, but all right. So why don't we take a break for right now? Let's come back at 10:15 and we're going to talk about React router mostly. All right. Now, some of you may remember, this is our news site from the other day where we left off. We've got our navigation bar up top. Can have the different sections of our news site. Got a little article teaser here, just showing the headline or the title of the article and then the date. We have some click functionality, but doesn't do anything interesting yet. And then here's a preview of what a single article might look like. If we refresh the page, it gives us a different article. But ideally, instead of just showing a random article every time that we refresh the page, what we would like to do is just show a list of teasers for all the articles and then let the user choose an article that they want to look at. So I'm going to make another component real quick here. Can make a component for an article list. It's going to take props, just like any component in React. So again, this is an article list, so we'll use an unordered list. But then in order to figure out what the list items are going to be, we're going to have to do a map over some of the props. So we're assuming here that the article list is going to take in a list of articles as one of its props.
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Let's hear it.
So did you see the new it's called hook or whatever they call it in React, the new use ID? So that React 18 has, so it makes it to where you don't have to manually put a key. It'll just make a key for you. I didn't really read it up on it, but it's called like use ID, and like it makes a unique key for you.
Are you real?
Yeah, it's like the new update. I was reading it, but I didn't really get to like really dive into it.
I'll have to look into this more in the future. That does sound useful. I've honestly always wondered, like, why do I have to supply this key? Why can't React just figure it out itself? Because it's always just like I'm looping over some array and the key is just the array index. Like, I'm not thinking too hard about this. I feel like React should be able to do this automatically if I don't specify it. And this isn't even a React specific problem. In every front end framework I've used, they make you specify a key when you render a list of items. And it always seemed to me like the framework should be able to figure that out automatically. So I'll have to look into that. I hope that, you know, React 18 actually has a useful solution to that problem. Thanks for sharing that. Almost forgot again, but I do have to return the component. Wow, do you have a question?
Oh, I was just about to ask, do you need to return the map, like within the map, that return statement, like within your map function? Is it has to be like return that list?
Probably. So this is a little bit weird because in JavaScript, if you have a one-line callback function, you don't need to specify return. I guess it's not always clear to me, like, if the JSX counts as one line or not. I think it also matters if I have the curly braces here or not. So there are some
That's what I
situations where
thought.
return is assumed. So yeah, I'm thinking,
Isn't it rough? Isn't it if you have the like regular parentheses, you don't, it's like an implicit return?
yeah. So if it's a one-line function and also you don't have the curly braces, there's an implicit return. But I think if it's a multi-line function, you need to have the curly braces. But if you have the curly braces, even for a one-line function, I think you need the return statement. Just in general, there are too many ways to write functions in JavaScript. So I try to have a pretty consistent style. I'll pretty much always have the curly braces and the return statement. But oftentimes in React code, you'll see it without it. Let's do it this way for now. All right, so article list given list of articles as a prop should be able to render a bunch of article teasers. Sukhdev, you have a question?
Yeah, for the article teaser, why is the ID index +1?
So we'll see this later today, but what I'm going to do with these IDs is I'm going to use them to like form URLs, as we're going to click on different articles, and then the article ID is going to be part of the URL, so we can route to a page that's specific for that article. And so this is just a minor aesthetic concern to make our URLs look a little bit more intelligible. They're going to start at 1 instead of starting at 0, because normally arrays in JavaScript start at index 0, but just to get our like URL IDs starting at 1, we're just adding 1 to all these. It's a pretty minor concern.
Thank you.
Was there another hand up?
Yeah, I had a question about the line 8 article teaser. I know in app.js that was our parent, and we have our children with the with article teaser, article list. How is this working in since it's child to child with article teaser here?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
So, in app.js, I usually see the article teaser, your other components within app.js. And we're passing that in and we'll use props for each one of those. Yes, right there from line 25 to 30. When we go into the components, this is the first time I'm seeing where I'm utilizing a child with another child. So article list is now using article teaser,
Mhm.
which isn't necessarily the prop. So I was just trying to understand how this works with each other. I didn't even know we could do it this way. So
All of your components can have other components put inside of them. So
Okay.
we started out simple. We just had the app.js as our top level component that we put other components inside of. But there's nothing really special about the app component. It's just one component that we put all of our others into. All of our other components can themselves have other components in them.
and we don't have to change props or anything like that because it goes back to app.js.
I mean, you'll have to think about the props. I'm not sure if I understand your question, but wherever you use the component from, you have to think about what props you're passing in and what data that component, what that parent component knows about what it's able to pass in. The tree structure of your components is pretty important. Just kind of like what Ankur was talking about the other day, where if you have like a piece of state that is used by multiple components, you have to find a common ancestor of all those components. So that's just what you need to be thinking about. Just what is the parent of all the components that need the same piece of data. But generally, yeah, you can put your components inside of other components all day long. That's how React works. That's how component-based front-end engineering works, basically. We're defining all of our own building blocks in terms of other building blocks that we've defined.
Okay, so in this particular example, we're utilizing app.js as our parent still.
It's the grandparent, the grandest parent, I guess.
And then the other ones are all on the same level where we can work with each other with the components, but using the parent app.js to be able to call each of those components within each other.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm just making sure I'm understanding it, that's all.
Yep. All right. John, question?
So with the article teaser, so we're not going to handle the click from clicking on the title, or are we going to refactor that later on? Because we're not calling it here, but we are calling it when we do the article teaser component on app.js.
We are going to refactor that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a different way going forward that we're going to handle the navigation instead of just manually handling click events. As we get to React Router, we'll see there's a slightly simpler way that we can manage that. But for right now, I want to see if I can get this article list to display in my app.js. So instead of just a single article teaser, I want to have an article list. Well, actually, so first of all, we need to import the article teaser here. So this component isn't done. Great. So my editor was able to autocomplete that. Got the article teaser from the same folder. It's right next to it there. So now in the app.js, we're going to import article list. And you'll note that article teaser is no longer being used in app.js. This is being grayed out here. So I'm going to delete that import. So the article list takes props.articles. So that should just be news. Did I say that? Yeah, lowercase n, news. So there's my article list. Okay, so it looks like I now have a list of articles, or a list of teasers at least. And like John just pointed out, I never actually filled in the handle title click. I didn't pass that through, so it doesn't actually do anything when I click. Just throws an error, but we're gonna clean that up shortly. And I also don't like how this list styling looks, but as we get to Bootstrap later on, I don't think that's going to be an issue, so I'm not going to deal with that right now. So we have our list of teasers. What I would like to happen is that I'm going to click on one of these teaser titles, and then it takes me to a separate page where I can view the article. So instead of just viewing it down here, I want to view it on a separate page. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to use React Router. So this is another library that we're going to be using. We have to install it because it's not part of the core React.
Raphael, would you have to install it for every project, or do you just have to install it once?
You would have to install it for every project you use it in. All the node modules are local, they're project specific.
And
So
then when you
just-
install it, you have to be at the same level as the, what is it, package.json?
Yeah, you should be looking at that file,
Okay.
ideally. Let me just double check I've got this syntax correct. Whatever, I'm just going to rule it. So here's the docs for React Router. It's actually not so bad. Let's see, I'm new to React Router. Okay, yeah. So the package is react-router-dom because there are different routers for React for other environments. Like for mobile phones, there's a different React Router library. But this is specifically for browsers for use in the DOM. So we're installing React Router DOM. Okay, so we got that. So now in my app.js, I'm gonna change the structure here a little bit. I'm gonna delete a lot of stuff. We're keeping the app nav, but we're going to get rid of the article list. This article. And we're going to use some features from React Router now. I just imported a bunch of similar looking things, but we'll see them used in just a second. Hopefully this will make a little more sense. So now in my app.js, this is the top level of my app, the component that all of my other components are rendered inside of. I'm going to add this new component here, router, that I just imported. And then inside of that, I'm going to define all of the different routes for my application, just the different URLs that we can have in the URL bar that'll load different components. inside of this, we will create individual route elements for all of the different routes for my application. So most importantly, you need to have a home page. So when the path is slash, we're going to render home page. Then we're going to have one other page in today's demo for individual articles. So now my app.js is serving more of like a table of contents. It's just defining all the different routes that are possible in my application. So I've got a home route, and when the URL is at slash, we're going to render this element, this component homepage. And when the path is slash articles slash some number article ID, we're going to render this other component article page. So the next thing I'm going to have to do in this demo is create these two components for the home page and the article page. One thing I want to point out, though, is that this URL here, this is a parameterized URL. This is pretty much the same syntax that we saw in Django, where there's a colon at the start of a part of a URL. That means this is a variable. So in Django, it was a little bit more organized because there was also a variable type defined in the URL parameter. You know, we had to say if it was like an int or a string or something. So React isn't going to be quite that strict, but it's still the same idea. When you see a colon at the beginning of a URL, this means that it's a URL parameter. So we need this variable article ID so we know which article was clicked on. Andrew?
Just trying to understand big picture. We're just doing the same thing in Django except on the front end now, almost.
Very similar, yeah.
And like, it just gives us the option to do both in the future, right?
I mean, you would probably do it in one place or the other, or you would have specific reasons why you would use client-side routes or server-side routes. I mean, they're different solutions to kind of the same problem, but they achieve slightly different results. So depending on what your needs are, what you want, you might choose one over the other. But certainly, like, it uses all the same metaphors, writing client-side routes as server-side routes. You know, we have the URL changing in the URL bar. We've got URL parameters. There are a lot of similarities here.
Cool, thank you.
Whole bunch of hands up, so just yell it out.
So is it pretty much just refreshing that section or whatever? Like if you were to change the URL, it's not actually like refreshing the whole page, just that one section?
Right. That's pretty much the whole point of client-side routing, honestly, is to give us the power to refresh only parts of the page when the URL changes. So you might notice that I put the app nav up at top outside of the router. And that's because I want the app nav to appear right there on every page, regardless of what the URL bar says. So this is kind of like in Django when we were working with extensible layout using the like extends keyword, and you had your base layout that, you know, had the header and the footer, and then everything was inserted inside of that with like block content. So this is kind of similar. Our app.js is sort of like our like base.html or layout.html. Anything that we want to appear on every page, we can put in our app.js. And then the router component here is where the page specific content is going to be. Depending on the URL, we're going to load one of these components, either the home page or the article page. Sound good?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. What other questions do we have?
My question was, so now that we can route pages on the, from the client side, are we pretty much done using Django templates and Jinja?
You can be. So, like I've said before, these are different solutions to similar problems. There might be some situations where you want to use both server-side and client-side rendering for your application. But certainly it is a very common modern trend that the only server-side route that sends HTML is the home page, which serves like your React single page application. And then all of the other routes that the user would see in their URL bar are just client-side routes. And so beyond that, the only other server routes you would have are for your API. So if you're going for that kind of architecture, then yeah, you would completely forget about Jinja and Django templates.
Okay, and how easy is it to implement like Django templates and React, like a hybrid?
Like on the same page?
Not on the same page, but let's say like one of the routes, like the login page is a template, and then once you get into the home page, it goes to React. Like how easy is it to implement that?
I don't think that's hard. You just have to have Django set up correctly so that for login, sign up, it renders the template, but then any authenticated user can, instead of getting a Django template, just gets the React single page application.
Yeah, I was asking because I don't know how easy is it to, because it's pretty easy to like log a user in and like create their session using templates. So how easy is it to do that with like React too? Like using like a React login page?
I think it'd be pretty similar to what we've done so far. I mean, I've already shown you using Ajax on the front end to send requests to a Django backend, and then using the Django authentication functionality to create users and start sessions for them. So it would be pretty similar with React, except that instead of just using like, plain vanilla JavaScript to send these requests and manage the forms, you'll be using React to manage the forms. So hopefully it should be a small jump from what we've learned already. You're just kind of plugging these technologies together that we've already used.
Can you scroll up on the code real quick so I can see? Thanks.
Are there any questions I can answer for you? All right, so I'm gonna make a home page really quick. So in my source folder, I'm gonna make another folder here for pages. So this is just gonna hold more React components, but because these are going to be for like full pages instead of just parts of a page, it kind of makes sense to put them in their own folder. So I don't need to do this, but I think it's a useful organization. So make a home page. So we're going to need the article list for one thing. And the article list needs the news. Okay, so here's our home page. All it does is show the article list with the news passed in. So in theory, that should render. I haven't built the article page, but we should go to the home page by default, so that should work. And it does not. Okay, what do we got? In app.js 28. Oh yeah, so I definitely did not import these. Let's try that again. And I don't have the article page yet, but I'm just going to copy paste the home page just so that my editor doesn't yell at me.
You need your export on there?
Yeah, that probably helps. Thank you. And similarly in the article page. All right, so here's my home page now. We've got, so the app nav is still here because that's not part of the router. But now we've got this UL for all of our articles. So our article list component, because the URL is at slash. What if we go to slash articles? So now this is the article page. I haven't put any content on it yet. I need to wire it up so it actually displays an article. Excuse me. But you can see that this is a different page. Just by changing the URL, we lose all the content that was on the home page, and we instead get this content from the article page. Let me change this console log. So we can see here, article page has loaded. Change this to go just home. Probably don't need all these other console logs here. And then home page has loaded. So as these different components are swapping out, they're re-rendering themselves. We're getting these logs. Cool. Andrew?
Theoretical question. Is the kind of weakness of this, doing this on the front end, is like nothing, since it's client side, nothing is really abstracted from the user, right?
How do you mean?
Because they can see all the JavaScript happening.
I mean, they can, but they don't have to. So I'd still say it's abstracted from the user. Like the user is, clicking around on the screen.
Oh yeah. What I mean is like anything secure wise, like can't be done this way, right? It has to be done like backend, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you cannot trust the front end. Anyone who's on your website can just literally just edit the JavaScript or CSS or whatever files they downloaded from your site and then run that on their front end and then just, submit forms in slightly different ways than you were expecting, or just read all your source code and know how your backend works as much as they can from reading your front end source code. So definitely anything secure, private, your business secrets or whatever, that all has to happen on the server side. The client side functionality is just for the user's convenience. Is there another hand up, another question?
Yeah, Raphael, do you mind scrolling back to your app.js file just to look over that code? I'm just trying to catch up here.
Yeah.
And then when you ran npm install, is it React router? What was that command again?
All right, it's not in this terminal for some reason, but from the docs. So I just went to React Router, their tutorial. They recommended npm install React Router DOM. I didn't specify a version number. I just said React Router DOM and it gets me the latest version. If you specifically want version 6, you can type it like that. Sound
Okay,
good?
thank you. Yep, thanks.
Were there other questions just now? Gosh, you guys. All right, so let's flesh out the article page now so we can actually see the individual articles that we've clicked on. But now note from the app.js already, some information is being passed into the article page. So this URL parameter, this article ID, we're going to access this as a, well, we're going to access this from the article page component. We're going to see how that happens in a second. I was about to say it gets passed in as a prop, but that is not actually true. So first of all, we have to know which article we are rendering. So I guess this is actually the next thing we need to do here. React Router DOM, in addition to the router, routes components, it includes this hook that we can use. So similar to use state, there is use params, which is how we'll access the URL parameters. So say const params equals use params. Let's actually just log that real quick, make sure this actually works how I think it does. Okay, so I went to article/2. Now I can see the params that I got from use params is this dictionary, because there's only one URL parameter in this URL, just the article ID. And so it's given that to me here. Article ID is 2. So that's great. That's exactly what I was hoping for. So now that we know which article we're looking for, I need to set some state here in just a second. news in here. And most interestingly, we're going to render the article. Before I just blindly render the article though, I'm going to be open-minded to the possibility that we might not pass the article in correctly. So I'm going to first check that it exists. So if we're actually able to get an article from the article array, or I'm sorry. Yeah, so if news article is actually defined, and then article is actually defined, then we can just render an article. All right, now if there is not an article, a little 404 error. All right, is this going to work? What am I forgetting here? I need to import the article component. What's going on here?
Line 17, article is misspelled on multimedia. On the second question mark.
Thank you. Components, article.js.
Don't you have to have a let or a const on 911 for article index?
Do indeed.
Would you move the
Okay.
article index above the use state?
Okay, much better. Okay, so now if I go to articles/2, shows me this article.
It only works if you type it in from the home page for some reason, I noticed.
It could be. That's fine though, because we're not going to be actually just typing these URLs into our URL bar. So I'm going to show you in a second now how we're going to actually navigate. So I showed you before that these guys should do something when we click on them, but I never actually built that functionality. So now we're going to actually use React Router to make all these links route us to the individual story pages. Bao, question?
It's more of a request. Before we move on, do you mind just run through what you just typed in the component file? Like the article page, and like, can you just like run it through, explain everything? Thank you.
So the first thing we have to know is which article was requested. So we need to get the URL parameter. So that's just going to be, this number here, 5. So that's what use params gets us. But all of the indices for the articles in the array are going to be off by 1 because it's 0 indexed instead of 1 indexed. So we're going to subtract 1 from whatever's actually in the URL. Because remember, in our, where is he? In our article list, everything has an ID of the index +1 because we just wanted those to be 1 indexed. So here we're compensating by subtracting 1 in order to get the article index from the article ID. And then once we figure out which article is requested, we set that article in the state so that we can render it onto the page. And then here we are checking first that there was an article defined, because it's possible that this line could fail somehow if they type in an index that doesn't exist. So like, oh, hang on a second, / articles. So there is no article 40,000 or 400,000. So it failed to get anything at that array index. So we're seeing this 404 page instead. That's just this here because article was not defined. But generally, if we pass in an index that is defined, it should render this article here, the article passed in. And if it has an image, we're checking if it has multimedia. We're going to put one of those images in there. Otherwise, just null. Sound good so far?
Yep, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason why we have multimedia on this second index?
It wasn't a very deliberate choice, just to have a different image than what's in the teaser, I suppose.
Oh, okay, I was just seeing if it was supposed to match whatever article that was, and it was, or because we're minusing 1 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, most articles will have like, I want to say like 4 or so images. So we just kind of randomly chose the third one here for no particular reason. All right, so let's go back to our article list here.
Hey, Raphael, sorry. Would you
Yep.
mind looking back at your homepage? I missed how it's getting wired from the homepage to the article page.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I just missed how the homepage is handling the title click to get routed over to the, or I guess we haven't done that yet.
Right, it's not.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question. Currently, these links do nothing.
Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Thanks.
Great question, though. That's the very next thing we're going to do here. Try to make those teaser titles do something when we click on them. So actually, I'm going to go to the article teaser component. So right now, this is an anchor with an href. When we click on it, it does whatever we want. I haven't specified anything, but it should be able to do something when we click on it. But that's kind of a hassle to like have an anchor element, handle the click event, prevent the default behavior, tell it to do something else all in code. I would rather that this worked a little bit more like a regular anchor tag. So fortunately, React Router provides some functionality that helps us do that. So we use this link element, which is the same as an anchor, as an A tag, except it's specifically used for React client-side routing. So instead of the anchor, I'm using this link element, but it needs to know what URL it's going to. So that's a new prop that I've just invented there. So we'll go to the article list. So as we're rendering these article teasers, each of these needs to have a page URL. Okay, so that seems reasonable. Should be going to the articles page slash then the index of that article +1, because we're having 1 indexed URLs, even though we have a 0 indexed array. Okay, so now you can even see, like in the lower left corner of my browser, when I hover over anything, we can see this URL, 3000/hash/articles/3, articles4. Down here, this one's articles 23. If we click on this, it shows us the 23rd article. Scrolling up here, this is the 15th article. This one actually had a photo, so that's cool. So we've basically recreated routing. The user feels like they're going to different pages because they see the URL changing, and then most of the content on the screen, gets wiped out, except for this top nav bar that never changes. But in fact, no requests are being sent to the server in this whole demo. This is all just in JavaScript on the front end. Question?
That's why it's so fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do a lot of websites actually do it like this?
Yeah, many websites do. This is, I want to say, a pretty common modern trend. Like a lot of people coming out of boot camps only know client-side rendering. And I think that's kind of terrible, honestly. So that's why I've made a point to like tell you guys that there's 2 different places you can render content. You should understand both of them and the trade-offs. So you're not just, treating every problem like a nail because you only have a hammer. But it's certainly a pretty common architectural style these days, I would say. Like if you go to YouTube, for example, is probably a really obvious example. You can play a video and then go to a different page and the video keeps playing. The only way that's possible is because YouTube is a single page application and it's not actually refreshing the whole page when you go to different pages. It's just using JavaScript to change the content.
So then if most things are being done by the client side, what is the server side doing? Like what is
the server side, the server is managing your API mostly. So if you're creating or modifying users or creating or modifying anything else in the database, you're sending AJAX requests to your server to handle those. But your server is going to be less concerned with like sending HTML, I guess, and it's going to be more about receiving and sending JSON data to interact with the database, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Saw a couple other hands up.
So would this be like right now, if we would, is this considered a static website? Whereas if we did it in Django, it's not a static website so far?
Yeah, I guess you would call this a static website as long as there's no backend, there's no database. Andrew?
So in the current case that we have, like if our data file was like humongous in like this current example, it would take longer to start up the website because the person would have to download the whole data file for all the news articles, right? While on the back end, you could like drip feed them like small parts, right? Just like the way we currently have it set up.
Right. Yeah, the way it's currently set up, that is a disadvantage, that the user has to load all of the news stories because we just have them in one big JSON file. Whereas, an intelligently set up server should be able to drip feed them, like you said, just send them what they requested.
So just so I understand better, so pretty much these data, like that data file with the 2 JSONs, will that be something that like the backend will be giving us, or will we be getting certain data from those from that backend? I don't know if that makes sense.
So in the very near future, as in like on Monday, when we continue this demo, we're not going to be using this news.json file. We're going to be sending API requests to the Hacker News API, and that's how we're going to be supplying our news stories to fit into these components.
Okay, so if we're getting the data from like another API, what will our backend be doing? Like our Django, when we put it into Django?
So for this exercise, your backend is going to be, not storing the news stories themselves, but storing kind of the relations between your users and the news stories. So you might be able to save like a favorite news story. And so that would be
Okay.
like, yeah, you just store the news item ID on some table that joins to the user. And I was talking about some kind of like a voting system, or you could have comments that are just for this website that aren't actually part of Hacker News, because maybe you want to have your own moderation guidelines or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I think favorites is probably the simplest, most obvious example. Any other questions for right now? All right. So let's see, before we take a break, there's one other thing that I want to explain about routing, about client-side routing. So this is not even specific to React. Any front-end framework that you're going to use, anytime you use front-end routing, there's going to be generally 2 different ways that you can do the routing. So I want to point out this hash sign in the URL here. You'll notice that whenever I click on a link, I said that the page URL was just /articles/4, but when we get in the URL is /hash/articles/4. So the reason why we get this is because we are using the hash router. So this specific router will put the hash sign in the URL to separate the server-side portion of the URL from the client-side portion. The alternative is the browser router, which works exactly the same way. It just doesn't have this hash sign here. Let's see. All right, so I feel the need to talk about this because I feel like just following the standard recommendations is going to actually lead you to trouble. The commonly recommended, so like there's 2 different routers and they work pretty much the same way. It is commonly recommended that you use the browser router. And I think people just say that because it looks prettier. That's literally the only advantage of using the browser router over the hash router, is that you get slightly cleaner URLs. Is it would just look like, /articles/4 instead of /hash/articles/4. So like that's the advantage of the browser router, is it makes your URLs look cleaner. In my opinion, that doesn't matter at all, because for one thing, a lot of modern browsers, especially mobile browsers, don't even show the full URL. So like if I'm looking at this website on my iPhone, I have to like click 2 or 3 times just to see if there is or is not a hash in the URL. Like Safari for iOS just doesn't want to show you the full URL. even if you do see the full URL, like most people aren't even looking past like the domain name to see if there is or isn't a hash. Most users, if they see the hash, don't even know what it's supposed to mean. Like most users think the entire URL is just gibberish, so they don't even try to read it. They don't have opinions about whether this hash is pretty or not. That's just like hipster developers who think that their URLs are prettier without the hash because they spend so much time looking at their URLs. But most users, I don't think, care one way or the other if you have a hash in your URL or not. So let me back up. The really good thing about the hash router is that it's really simple under the hood. It's very simple technology because this concept of having the hash in the URL, this is actually built into the browser. So before React, before we're even thinking about JavaScript, browsers already have this concept of a hash in a URL called window.location.hash. It just tells you the part of the URL after the hash. And so this is already used for client-side routing, honestly, without using any JavaScript. So let me show you an example here. So here in the React, in the React documentation here, they've got these anchors, but the href is not an external URL. The anchor, the href is a hash link. So this means it'll take you to an element on this same page with the ID hash server-side rendering SSR. So like I click on this button, and so it takes me not to a different page, I'm on the same page, but it appends this hash in the URL, server-side rendering SSR. So this idea of rendering to parts of a page using the hash, and that it's a client-side route, it does not send a request to the server, this is already built into the browser. Like you don't have to write any code to make it work this way. React didn't have to invent anything to make it work this way. This is like built-in browser functionality. So the hash router in React Router is actually like a very thin layer on top of the browser's default functionality. So there's less code, there's just less opportunity for bugs. I think it's just more reliable in general. And the downsides of hash router are something that people are never going to notice. Whereas if you're using the browser router, so you don't have this hash. Now, by default, this should be a server-side route. So by default, your browser would send a GET request to your Django server at /articles/4. So React has to run extra code to intercept this event so that every time the URL changes, it doesn't actually send a request to your server, but it just changes the routes in React. It changes the component in React. The problem is that React is not always able to intercept these requests. So if you just refresh the page, just by clicking the refresh button here, that's going to send a request to your server at whatever URL is in the URL bar. So that means that your server needs to be prepared to handle any route that your client can handle. So at best, you're duplicating logic because you have to write duplicate route handlers on your server side to handle anything that your client can handle. Make sure that your server knows that those are client routes and that it should like forward that to the client. It should send the React spot and then let React handle it. Otherwise, you can get bugs in your server where like legitimate requests for your client are triggering 404 errors or just other weird behavior. Basically, using the browser router just creates a whole bunch of bugs immediately that you will have to fix on your server side. I think if you were just a purely front-end developer and you were not like aware of what happens on the server side, you might prefer the browser router just because it looks prettier. But for us as full stack developers, where we're responsible for all parts of the system, I'm going to just tell you my recommendation from my past experience is that the hash router is minimally complex and it's not going to cause you more problems or bugs in the future. Whereas the browser router is just like problems waiting to happen and you're going to be debugging that repeatedly in the future. And I know that they recommend that you do not use the hash router, but they don't say why. There's no explanation for this recommendation at all. Just like, don't do it. It's not cool. And then here in the explanation for what the hash router is and when you should use it, this situation describes every React application you'll ever build. So like, I don't know why they're so hesitant about this, because for every, anytime you're doing client-side rendering, the whole point is that the URL should not be sent to the server. It's for the client. So anytime you're using React Router, this is what you want to happen. So I would strongly recommend you always use the hash router. You will commonly see code snippets using the browser router. And if you choose to use that in your own code, I'm not gonna, deduct points from you or whatever, like definitely go for it, learn more stuff. But I'm just telling you that I am predicting you'll have more problems with it. And if you don't care about the difference, I would recommend the hash router. So yeah, that's my spiel. Does anybody have any questions about those two router choices before we take a break?
Did you possibly leave your article list up?
Yeah, Raphael.
Yeah, I was just looking at the page's URL.
Yeah. Okay, Raphael. So I feel like a lot was said about browser router versus hash router. If you could like condense it to like one or two sentences, why do you think hash router is better than browser router?
Hash router is much simpler under the hood. And so there's fewer opportunities for bugs to be created in your code as a result of choosing it. It's just very similar to what your browser does by default naturally. And so just the rest of your code is able to interact with it pretty easily. Whereas if you're using the browser router, that immediately creates problems that you have to deal with on your server.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 11:35, and we're going to use React Bootstrap to make this application a little bit less ugly. All right, so we've got our news site here. It's like kind of functional, but it's real heckin' ugly. So I would like to use some Bootstrap to try to make this look prettier in a hurry. So first of all, now I could just use regular old Bootstrap the same way we've been doing already. I could, where did I put you? Next HTML, we could just put a link tag in here. Sorry, we can put a link tag right in here for the Bootstrap CSS, put a script tag here for the Bootstrap JavaScript, and then just use the Bootstrap classes in our components. We can do that the same way we have been. But there is a better option that's available to us because we're using React. People have saved us the trouble of applying these Bootstrap styles to React components, and we can just import these ready-made components already into our application. So this is a pretty basic example here. I'm just looking at the docs for React Bootstrap. But before we would have columns and rows and containers, but those were all divs with classes on them. So now it's just a container element with a row element with a call element. So first of all, in order to add this to our application, we're going to npm install it. So notice I'm installing two things here actually in one command. I'm installing regular Bootstrap through npm and also installing React Bootstrap which is specifically to allow React to integrate with Bootstrap easily. Andrew, question?
I have a request and you might go into it. Can you show us where the files are afterwards? Because I did this for like one of the assignments like last week or the week before, and I was just having like a really hard time understanding what was happening when I used React Bootstrap.
So generally, everything you install with Node is going to be somewhere in your Node modules. So we've got Bootstrap over here. Dist, this is distribution. Like, these are the files that you're actually supposed to use. They're not the source files. And so then bootstrap.css should be like the main Bootstrap file. But yeah, everything is right in there in the Node modules. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, is React Bootstrap in there too?
Should be, yeah.
I think like when I did it, I ran like the install like Bootstrap, React Bootstrap in the wrong folder.
Mhm.
Like I did it like, because normally when we create the project, it creates like the folder that we go
Right.
into, and then like goes a little bit low. I think I did it like 2 folders up, and it was just messing like everything up in the app.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
It was just driving me crazy. I could not understand what was going on.
But yeah, here's React Bootstrap. Here are all of the various components that you can import using React Bootstrap.
So you ran the command in the same folder where you like do npm start, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at the package JSON. This is in my current folder.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So next, okay, so we need to, first of all, just apply the CSS to our application. So just like, I was telling you before that we could, in the index.html, just load the bootstrap.css right in here in our index.html. But this is a React application. It's very JavaScript centric. So we're going to try to do this in a slightly more React-ish kind of way. So in the index.js, which is like the top level JavaScript file that includes all of my other JavaScript files. So here, I'm going to import the Bootstrap CSS file. So just saying import Bootstrap, that's going to look in my Node modules folder. So we already showed you that we've got node modules / bootstrap. I want to import that CSS file. So I'm going to say bootstrap /dist /css /bootstrap.min.css. And if you forget exactly where it is in this file path, like you could just look through your node modules, but I'm also pretty sure it tells you to do that. Yeah, here we go. So in the quick start guide, the introduction for React Bootstrap, it'll tell you exactly what to import to get the base styles. So I've imported that style sheet. Let's go back to my React app. Okay, so we do have some of the default styles applied. So like React or Bootstrap is applying the fonts. It's taking the margin off the body. So we've got some of the Bootstrap default styles, but we're still not using any Bootstrap components. We just have vanilla HTML in here. So I would like to replace some of these components with Bootstrap components, make them look a little bit prettier. So first, I'm gonna fix up the nav bar. Well, actually, let's first see what's available to me. So I'm gonna look at React Bootstrap, look through the docs here. I'm gonna look at components. These are all the different components I might want to use. I like their nav bar. They got a few different examples. This one here looks pretty good. I just kind of like this style. It seems pretty simple. So I'm going to grab this nav bar. Okay, so that's just the copy pasted nav bar from the docs. Now I'm going to need to modify this to make it work for me. So critical difference here. Well, for one thing, this navbar brand goes to hash home. I'm just going to fix this real quick. My home page is just that hash. Change that. But also, this has hard-coded 3 links here for nav items. Whereas the nav I had before, we were mapping over props.nav items and returning an anchor tag for each item. So instead, we're going to map over props and return a nav link for each item, because that's the Bootstrap component for making a link, apparently. So let's say props.nav. So I'm not going to worry about the href for right now, because my nav bar actually never navigated to different interesting pages. So that's going to come in a later day, possibly tomorrow or Monday. We're going to make the nav bar actually go to different pages. But for now, we're just going to make it look nice. Instead of just saying home, I'll print the nav items label. Of course, we need a unique key for everything because we're rendering in a list. All right, so let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I just tried to use a whole bunch of components that were not defined, so I need to actually import those from React Bootstrap. So I use the nav bar, nav, and a container. Okay. So here's my new bootstrapping Navbar. But notice that it's still like playing nicely with my React application. I'm able to feed in the nav items data. Because it's taking in props. We have props.nav items, which is just this list of different sections. And in the near future, we're going to update that to more closely resemble the Hacker News sections. But for now, it's just dummy data, so we can populate something that looks like a nav bar. Yeah, so we mostly just copy pasted the Bootstrap nav bar. Just have to find the one part of the Bootstrap boilerplate that is actually repeated based on like our array in our application. So we map over that, create the nav link. And yeah, that creates our Bootstrap nav bar. So again, these links don't actually do anything in our application. That's coming soon. Except that this first one actually does take us to the home page. So that works. That's nice. All right, so that's one Bootstrap component. I'm gonna maybe add one more in here. I don't really like how the article list looks. I'm gonna see if Bootstrap has a different component that looks a little bit prettier. Wait, this is a React router. I'm looking for React Bootstrap. Okay, so I don't like my list. Is there any listy thing here? Okay, there's a list group. Maybe that's something. Okay, this looks like a list of things. I think it's prettier than what I have on my page, so I'm going to use this. Andrew, do you have a question?
Why is there a page for React Bootstrap and a page for just regular Bootstrap? Are they like different in their implementation? Is it like, because you're mostly just like copy pasting and using the same format, right? Can't you just use the regular page from like the Get Bootstrap manual?
So the regular Bootstrap docs, the examples are all going to be in plain HTML, just with divs that have classes assigned to them. Whereas the React Bootstrap documentation, this is all going to be with React components. So if I don't want to like look at that level of detail of the actual HTML elements with the Bootstrap classes on them, this is a little bit more abstracted. I'm just working with these React elements.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that definitely helps my understanding of it. Just the way you said it.
Yeah. If you look at just the sidebar, it's easy to forget where you're at because the organization is the same. They have the same components. They both have layout and forms and a grid system or whatever. It's just the actual examples are going to be, React components instead of HTML and CSS. So anyways, I like this list group here. I think this is pretty enough. So it's a list group and it has list group.item inside of it. So let's go to my article list, right? Yes, I'm going to update my article list. So instead of a list item, just a regular LI. Well, let's back up. Instead of a UL, we're going to use the list group. And before I forget, I have to import this.
Hello, Rafa, I have a question, and sorry if you already explained this, but did you use the same CDN as regular Bootstrap, or did you not even use a CDN, like in the HTML?
So we're not
I know
using
in
the
the
CDN.
index.html. Okay.
Yeah, in this case,
So
we're
you
not
just-
using CDN. So that is an interesting
Because
question.
I think you can use like a CDN, right?
I'm sorry, I'm having
I
trouble.
was just gonna
hearing
say
you.
you can use CDNs, right? In the index.html.
Yeah, it's totally an option
You can use a CDN, right? In index. Okay.
for sure. That's what I was showing you before. Like if you wanted to, I could just put a link in my index HTML. And this could be the Bootstrap CDN, and we could access it like that. And just kind of in a React application, it's slightly more consistent with the rest of our style if we download it first and then import it like this. Although it's worth noting that this does have different implications for the client. So if we're using the CDN, the user doesn't have to download Bootstrap from us. They're downloading it from the CDN. And so that does actually make the application load faster if the user can download all of the files they need from different sources instead of getting them all from our server. Especially CDNs are going to be faster than our server, but also just being able to download them from multiple different sources is faster than getting them all from the same source.
Okay.
So the way we're doing it now instead is that like the CSS is kind of part of our application bundle. And so the user has to download Bootstrap from us, from our Django server in order to use the application. I think of that as being slightly less efficient. It doesn't really make a huge difference, honestly. And this is just kind of more conventionally how single page applications are built, where you just kind of like package everything the user needs into one bundle instead of like relying on third-party CDNs.
Okay.
But you definitely do have
that-
options.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, so I got this list group in here. So instead of a UL, we enclose them all in a list group. And then when we map over our articles, instead of returning an LI, we will return this group dot item. And really everything else stays the same, I think. The list group item is a pretty simple component. Just renders whatever you give it inside of it. All right, and so now it's slightly prettier. So we can see these divs have the class odd item because I specified they should have these classes odd item or even item based on if it's an odd or even list item, but also because it's a list group item from React Bootstrap, it gets this class list group item, which implies all these other styles. So in a lot of ways, this is really the same as just using regular Bootstrap. They're just divs that have classes on them, and Bootstrap has a style sheet, so those classes imply various styles. When your code breaks using React Bootstrap, you'll probably debug it in the same way you debug regular Bootstrap, just looking at the classes and styles that are applied to your elements and see what you were expecting and why it's not there. So it's really like React Bootstrap is just a thin layer on top of regular Bootstrap that just lets you skip a couple steps when you're working with React. Like I could have just defined this list group component myself, but someone did it for me, and I'm happy that they saved me that little bit of extra effort. So yeah, I just showed you two components here today. The list group because it was simple, and the nav bar because it's my favorite and I think it's very important. But there's a whole bunch of other ones here. Hopefully you're going to spend a little bit more time than I took today styling your news site. And so you might look at some of these other React Bootstrap components. I mean, they're the same as the regular Bootstrap components, and see how you can style your application, make it a little prettier. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say today about React Router, React Bootstrap. I know there's a lot of new concepts though, so let's hear some questions. What questions do we have? Wow, what you got?
Is it possible, like, do you mind explaining the router portion one more time, please? I'm still kind of confused about it.
Sure. Back in the app.js we're talking about.
Yes, like how did you like implement the router and allow user to click in and takes you to another page, like the logic behind it?
Okay, so first of all, in the app.js, we've got our router, which defines all the different routes for our application. And we're saying that this is where they're going to go. So we can have other things on our app.js that are kind of like, that are going to be included in every page. So like this this app nav is outside of the router. That means it gets included in every page. But the router component, this changes when the URL changes. It's going to swap in a particular component based on the URL. So if the URL is /hash, the router component is going to render this homepage component inside of it. If the URL is /hash/articles/any number, then our router component will render the article page inside of it. And so those are just other components that we imported from our pages. We just define those guys over here. But so in the article page, which is a little bit more interesting, this one needs to get parameters from the URL. Because remember in the app.js, when we defined this route, because this section of the URL starts with a colon, this indicates a URL parameter. So the article page is expecting a URL parameter, article ID, that tells it which article it's supposed to render. So here is our article page. In order to get that URL parameter, we have to use a React hook. It's not just automatically passed in as a prop. So from React router, we can get the use params hook. We just call use params assigned to a variable, and this gives us the parameters that were passed in. So we use that ID number, this ID number in the URL to index into our news array to just get whichever news item was requested. And then, so then that becomes our article. We set in state. And then our article page is able to render that article, the same way any component renders the data you pass into it. Does that help?
Yeah, and were there a page URL key somewhere in your code? I remember, like a key name.
Yeah, where did we put that? On the article teaser. Yeah, so the teasers need to know when you click on them, what page does it take you to? So each of these article teasers, when it gets rendered, we pass in a page.url. Because the link tag needs to know, the URL it's linking to. It's basically an anchor, but instead of href equals, we say link to equals. I honestly really like this syntax. I think it just reads easily. It reads like English. Like if I was redefining HTML, I would probably rename an anchor to a link tag and rename the href to a to. I just think this is very legible.
And where does that page URL came from again?
Yep. So the article teaser is rendered by the article list. Screw. So as the article list is rendering the articles, we get this index that just is from the map callback. This index is going to refer to every article's index in the array as we're looping over them. And so since our article IDs are based on those indexes, we just pass the index +1 as the page URL.
So it's like a prop value we passed into the other component.
Yep. Yeah, they got a bunch of props. It's got an ID. It's got a whole bunch of props from the article, such as, the title and abstract and whatever. And then also just one new one we added most recently is the page URL. Sukhdev, you have a question?
Yeah, just to pass multiple parameters back on that app.js, would it just be a backslash with a colon in the next parameter? And then we can use params to access it again? Is that how we would do it?
Uh-huh. So yeah, now params is article ID is 3, bar is goodbye, foo is hello. Just whatever we passed in there in the order that we passed them in, those are the URL parameters. Because we did specify the order in the app.js. It's article ID is first, and then foo, and then bar. So we passed in 3, hello, goodbye. So 3 is the article ID, hello is the value for foo, and then goodbye is the value for bar. They're just in a different order. They're in a different order here because my console is putting them in alphabetical order. But that's not the order I defined them in for my URL.
No, that's a great example. Thank you. Also on article page, you I think that's where we actually use the state, reset the state value. So we weren't doing that, I thought, with like the child components before, but when we're templating pages, it's okay to then set state values again on the actual pages.
Can you say that again?
I might be confused here between the parent and the child components and these templates. But on article page, we're using use state there to set the state values again. So on templating, that's okay. We weren't really doing that on component like child components before because we wanted to keep it at the parent level, apparently. Or I might be confused. I'm not sure.
No, you're correct. That's a good question. So I think we're seeing some differences here because just our application is bigger than it's been before. The applications we've been before, I'd say, had maybe 2 layers. We had an app component at the top layer and then some components inside of that. And so it kind of made sense that the app would have like basically all of the state, and then the child components didn't really know anything about the state. They just handled the props that were passed into them. But now, since we have kind of this extra layer, we have to think again about how we're organizing our application and which components need to know about which information. So now our app component isn't really holding most of our individual, like smaller components. It's just holding the pages themselves. And so the pages are kind of taking the role that our app component would have taken in previous exercises, where it's more of that like top level parent that has like kind of all the information, even though there can still be more information in the app state that's not in a specific pages state. But generally speaking, you just need to think about which components need to know about some given piece of information. So if the article page needs to know about some piece of state, but the app.js doesn't care about it, then it doesn't need to be set in the state in app.js. Just only declare the state in the parent that needs to know about it, or the parent whose children need to know about it. Also, just in general, as React applications get more complicated, state becomes harder and harder to manage with the built-in state management tools with useState. And so you might be looking to specific state management tools like Redux or MobX for React, which are designed for this purpose. Managing state does get hard in React as you build bigger applications. So if you think that this is difficult for more complex situations, like it's not just you, this is a hard problem. And there are separate specific tools that people use to solve these problems.
Thank you.
Yep. Got a couple other hands up.
Yeah, can we see the article page again, the JS? I guess my question is, do you have to use a state for the article here? Like if you didn't, would that do anything wrong, I guess? Like if you just did like a regular variable for article instead of making the state.
I think in this case, we could have probably gotten away without using state, honestly, because the article only changes when the page changes. So we can just always read that from props.
Right.
Like when props changes, that also triggers the component to re-render. So we could just, wait for the props to change. So yeah, I think you're right. In this case, there's possibly a more elegant way that this code could have been written, where we don't actually use state in the article page and we just rely on the props. But I mean, it's possible that in the future, this article page could become more complicated and it might have to apply its own logic on the page instead of just blindly rendering it. So in the future, this might become useful. But for this minimal example that I've coded out today, we could probably get by without it.
Cool. Thank you.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah, I just want to, could you go back to app.js real quick? I just want to kind of think about it in a Django format, like the app navbar base HTML. All the routes are extends that base HTML at this point.
Yep. Because yeah, if you look at the home page
Yeah.
or article page, this is not a complete HTML document. So yeah, this is like block content that extends layout. We just stick in the middle of here. Cool.
Raphael.
Edgar, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question and a request. So like for my request, I don't know how hard it would be, but I know YouTube has like chapters to where you can like break apart the video into different sections, like maybe like a router section and then a section for the nav bar or something like that. I don't know if you guys could do that.
You're talking about like on the video that we upload?
Yeah, on the YouTube video.
We could potentially do that.
Yeah. I don't know how hard it would be, to be honest.
I mean, hard is relative, but it sounds relatively effortful, and moreover, it sounds like the kind of thing I'm likely to forget.
Okay.
Let me propose a different solution, is that during the lecture, I could commit multiple times so that if you want, when you're reviewing the demo code, you can go back to a specific commit and be like, what did the code look like 30 minutes into the lecture? What did the code look like 60 minutes into the lecture, or whatever?
Okay.
Would that be cool?
Yeah, I think that would work too.
Okay, so again, I'm probably going to forget to commit mid-lecture while I'm just thinking about the demo I'm trying to build. But feel free to interrupt me, ask a question at any point, and say like after this lecture, I would really like to study how the app looks at this point. Could we commit now before continuing?
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then for my second question, could you like navigate through the actual web page again, and then just to like see how it's supposed to work?
So here's our web page. These top navbar links don't do anything.
Okay.
Except this first one does take me home. All the article links take me to hash articles, article ID.
Okay.
And then this icon just says Navbar, but it's supposed to be like your company logo or whatever. Takes me back to the homepage.
Okay. And eventually because I know we have links to the actual article, right? The actual news article. I don't know. I think that's in the JSON file.
It is. Yeah, that would be a really good thing for a news app to have, is if you could read the actual article. So I'm going to say that on probably tomorrow or Monday, that's going to be something we will add, is on the actual, I guess it would be nice if the article page had the actual article, but maybe on the article page, we'll just have a link to the full article because, or well, hold up. I'm getting myself confused. So this news.json file doesn't have the full article text. It just has the URL to the article.
Okay.
But when we're using the actual Hacker News API, it'll have the URL and the full article text. So yeah, that would be cool if on the article page, we had the full article text that they're trying to read.
Okay, sounds good.
Other questions?
It's less of a question, it's more of feedback for Edgar or anyone else that's having issues on the videos. You can make a comment and put in timestamps for each of the topic changes as well. That way it doesn't overbear the instructors and the other stuff that they're going to have to do.
Okay, that sounds pretty easy. You just add a comment and then people can jump to the different like comments in the video.
Well, in your comment, you can just have like a list of timestamps for the different like topics that.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, that sounds easy enough.
Speaking on the topic of comments, so we're still talking about uploading the YouTube video, right? Yeah, so I think I've actually seen it in some of the uploaded lectures where if you put the timestamp in the description, it will break that, it'll break the timeline up into that. But I guess the thing about that is, I'm not saying they wouldn't be nice, they would most definitely be nice. But the thing about that is, if you don't remember like where exactly in the lecture it happened, you'll have to scrub through the video to find that timestamp. So I guess if that's a lot of trouble, if you do the periodic commits, maybe just put in a little extra line saying like what time maybe your clock is saying. So if you did something like notable right now, maybe you could put in a little file with a comment saying this was done at 12:14 p.m., something like that.
Okay, yeah, sounds useful. Can definitely put the current time in my commits, or actually, yeah, so Git definitely automatically records the time when you commit things. So that could be useful. Any other questions?
Can I just ask a quick question about the Hangman challenge? Are there any like word APIs that you would recommend that you like? Like if we want to pull from somewhere else, because that word list is kind of unusual.
Yeah, if you search for random word API, there's like one on Heroku that some random person made. That's one I use. It's really simple. He has decent documentation, or he or she, whoever created it. I think it's the first Google result. If you just search for random word API, it should be a Heroku app API, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, these are really weird words. Who does this?
Yeah, thank you, Anka.
But yeah, just generally, if you search for anything API, you will find an API that gives you information about the thing you're curious on. Lots of people build all kinds of wacky APIs. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know. So my favorite Hangman word is Duchess ship. It's one of the only English words that has 3 consecutive letters in it. Because it's like Duchess ends in 2 S's and then ship has another N, another S. So people get really confused when they say S and you just do like 3 of them in a row. I just love seeing the look on people's face. Hymn is also a really great one, HYMN, because it doesn't have like conventional vowels in it. Nobody guesses that. But I guess this isn't like a Hangman boot camp. So those are all the Hangman secret strategies I'm going to give you for right now. Does anyone have any other questions about the homework or the exercise today? I know we're going over a little bit. Don't want to keep you all day. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. All right. On that note, I'm going to conclude today's lecture. So today is a Thursday. We're going to be doing pair programming. I'm going to Slack out your pairs in just a few minutes. We got a couple exercises between Hangman and the news site. So Hangman is a multi-day exercise. Is that right, Ankur? We got 2 or 3 days for that one.
Yeah, I think today and tomorrow. It's a slightly longer challenge. It's a fun one though, so definitely attempt it if you have a chance.
Okay, yeah, definitely super fun challenge. Wouldn't want you to just, only have 1 day of fun. So we got 2 days of fun here. Hope you enjoy it. Do we have anything this afternoon? No other talks this afternoon. So yeah, just hope you enjoy your lunch, work on the exercises. I'm glad the TAs this evening, and that's all we got for today. Have fun, everybody.